Hi, my name is Erin Butler. I'm the Terrestrial Wildlife Program Manager out of the Kingman office, and I'm here to continue our webcast along about the hunt guidelines. So just a quick reminder, the guidelines are based on biological limits for different species. It's to guide the wildlife managers through their hunt recommendation processes. They acknowledge all of our planning documents and what we want to do with those species, and to manage for sustainable wildlife populations. We are at the same spot in the timeline where we were last week, where we're reviewing all the comments and coming up with draft proposals. So far, we've received some public outreach, which Amber reviewed last week. Since last week's meeting, we've got comments coming in. We've got 5 that we got immediately and some more have come in. And tonight we're going to talk about archery deer and mandatory reporting. So the sub-team for the archery deer reviewed the guidelines. The current archery deer guidelines are that harvest should not exceed 20% of the total take, except in those units where we have alternative structures with no January season, or we only have archery and muzzleloader seasons in the unit. When the take exceeds 20% of the total harvest, the guidelines recommend for us to decrease those, and the wildlife managers use structures to take seasons out to decrease that harvest. Or when it drops below 10%, then we use the same structures to put them back in. We do those in incremental changes so that we're managing for 10 to 20% of the archery harvest to be for deer. So we wanted to just look back and make sure we were using the right number. So we took an evaluation of the total number of people who buy over-the-counter deer tags and those people who put in for general hunts to try to come up together with what the demand might be for archery. And when you look at the total first choice applicants for all draw hunts and the people that buy tags, 19.99% of those come out as archery deer hunters buying OTC tags. When you take out the people who are only applying for archery deer tags first in the general draw, that number still comes out to 20.55. So we're going to continue along with our 20% guideline. The prescriptions that we use to decrease or increase deer harvest in the units are to remove seasons. So you might eliminate a December season or 2 weeks of a January season, a whole January season, your August-September season, or you might go to a draw in whatever appropriate time frame that is. So we're talking about the harvest here, and we just wanted to show that archery harvest is increasing. You can see on the screen that the number of people harvesting animals has tripled, and the hunt success has risen from 7% to 14% over the last couple of decades. So this last year when we looked at guidelines, we looked at this table, and all these places where it's red, which I know this table is hard to see, but all the places it's red is where that take was over 20% of the total deer take in a unit. We're looking at 3-year means, and so this data indicated that we needed to make some changes in some places. When we look at tag sales, we can see that the total tag sales has also increased over the last couple decades, and the number tracks with the residents that are buying tags, and we've had a slight increase in the number of non-residents who are buying tags. That's gone from 6% to 10.5%, which tracks with the number of tags non-residents would get if it was a draw. So the team decided to do evaluations of our options for changing the archery deer guidelines. And the things that we reviewed include staying the same with some changes in what type of season structures are being offered and variations in those, harvest thresholds, a set number of deer per unit or hunt area, and then that area closes, rotating open seasons across the state through different season times, going to a complete draw that is for units or for combined units in a hunt area, or a draw for an invitation to come buy an OTC deer tag. And we also looked at an option where the August seasons stay as OTC tags, but the draw is for December and January seasons. So tonight I'm just going to tell you about the 3 that we're moving forward with and what we're presenting to the commission as options. And the first one is status quo. So if we maintain our current OTC tag sales, maintain the current harvest, about 3,000 animals per year, this is not the best way to control deer harvest if that's the goal. It will likely lead to continued closures, and eventually some of those units will end up in a draw. We did look at the monetary. This also does not restrict non-residents, because the only way we can do that through statute is through a draw. And then we looked at the monetary value. Right now, the OTC tag sales are about $2.1 million for the department. So we would maintain that with hoping to continue the 10.5 non-resident percentage of sales. The second one we're taking forward is harvest thresholds. So this will maintain the over-the-counter unlimited sales structure like we have now, but we will have better abilities to control the harvest taken in an area or a hunt area. It may lead to season closures or different timeframes that those seasons are open. We would not limit non-resident participation through this. A complication of it is that it requires mandatory reporting, which is a rule change that would take up to 2 years to be able to implement. It would have to rely heavily on that mandatory reporting and online sales, which is kind of a technology-heavy thing we would have to work through with the department. Looking at the monetary value, it would maintain that 2.1 million in tag sales and hopefully the 10.5% of non-residents. The third option is going to completely to a draw. And in this option, we would continue to try to limit harvest to less than 20% of the unit or the hunt area. We would come up with that allocation based on the current number of tag sales, an estimated hunt success of 25%, and then allocate those tags out based on that, and then make adjustments 3 years, when we had some 3-year means to make adjustments with that. We do think that this would end up with areas where we have leftover tags in some of the less popular units. This is the best way to control deer harvest throughout the state, through a unit or a hunt area. It does restrict non-residents because it's a draw, so they would be getting less than 10% of the tags. Another thing we would have to think about in this process is whether or not we would have a January season. That adds a complication in our draw system. If we have a January season, that would likely happen in the spring draw, which would put it where you would apply 2 different draws during the year, 2 applications, and we think it will create a bonus creep for those people who are maintaining their maximum bonus points. So that those people would be looking at 2 points per year that they would be purchasing. We do think that we would see a loss of revenue during this, and we think it'd be about $1 million. It may be offset to some degree by the second draw and the additional application fees we'd get from that. So those are the 3 options that we're presenting to the commission. And if you have any comments, you can send them in. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Edward Sini, and he's going to talk to you about mandatory reporting.
Hi, my name is Edward Sini. I'm the Wildlife Manager for Unit 5 Adam out of the Flagstaff office. I'll be giving you an update today on the mandatory reporting sub to the hunt guidelines team. Starting off, we'll look at the evaluation process, some of the things that we've looked at. The evaluation process that the mandatory reporting sub team has followed is listed here. First, we did some internal scoping and set our sights on where we were lacking in our current harvest survey structure. We benchmarked with other states, putting emphasis on Western states and those who lacked a check station culture. Throughout the process, we have received valuable public input that we review at every team meeting. We've developed a pro-con or a cost-benefit list to some different systems of mandatory reporting. And we are currently in the process of summarizing our results and preparing them for the hunt guideline review team and ultimately the commission. little bit of the history behind mandatory reporting in the state of Arizona. It's been brought up many times before, and the reason we haven't switched is because in the past the consensus was that it wouldn't improve management and it would require some kind of punitive response for noncompliance. The Commission has not been supportive of this last point when mandatory reporting has been reviewed previously. Our current data is statistically strong enough. It allows us to provide for hunt recommendations, it allows us to model reporting bias, and allows us to extrapolate to non-responses. Not only would we not gain anything for many of our hunts, but it would set us back. We have 60 years of trend data, and a new change would abandon that trend and take time to ultimately develop a new trend. It's worth noting that generally, trend data is what inputs decision-making, not necessarily a static one-year figure. A one-year figure means nothing if we don't have a trend to compare it against. Another consideration for the history of mandatory reporting is the increased regulation and barriers to R3. R3 is recruitment, retention, and reactivation of hunters. This is an important part of the mission for the Arizona Game and Fish Department. The department would like to see reporting improve for several hunts, specifically OTC deer and youth turkey, and would like to do so without making a legal requirement. One of the ways that the department has looked at doing this is through tag modernization. Tag modernization, or what some Western states refer to as e-tagging programs, was identified and initiated in early 2020. The hope is that tag modernization would improve our survey data in these under-returned hunts without requiring mandatory reporting through a rule change. Here you can see a chart of our 2020 hunter questionnaire returns. 40% returns are statistically very strong for most of our hunts. Hunts with low tag numbers require higher return rates, as each return is weighed more heavily in these data sets. When you only have 5 tags in a hunt, we need a higher return rate to narrow our confidence intervals. Hunts with low tag numbers are supplemented through department staff calling hunters in order to increase return rates. Historically, our lowest rates of return have been through the youth turkey. You can see it there as OTC YA turkey, that's youth NE turkey, and OTC deer, which average around 25%. In 2020, we sent out 28,637 questionnaires for 2020 OTC deer tags, and we received back 6,951 questionnaires, including both the online and paper returns. Some of the other considerations for our harvest survey program would be that mandatory reporting data has increased complications. It doesn't factor in things such as hunters who do not kill or participation, hunters who do not hunt. Noncompliance with the program is also not represented. These are things that other states who have mandatory reporting have to consider. Knowing if a hunter did not shoot a deer is just as valuable as knowing if they did. Sometimes it is more desirable to know when and where hunters were unsuccessful, because this may suggest lower deer populations in those units. There is other valuable information about hunting activity in addition to success, such as participation and effort. Participation data is used to estimate harvest for unsampled hunters, and effort data is used to compare harvest relatively across different hunting units in past years. Again, we have 60+ years of trend data from probabilistically designed surveys. It allows for consistent biases to be removed. For example, we know that someone is more likely to return their harvest questionnaire if they harvested. Having 60+ years of trend data allows us to correct for that. Other concerns from the harvest survey program would be that mandatory harvest reporting would allow for increased accuracy of total animals harvested by unit and method. However, these changes would require 5 to 10 years to establish new trend data. Law enforcement considerations for mandatory reporting. Through our internal scoping, we've recognized that rewards such as a bonus point for complying with mandatory harvest reporting system would not be offered to those who do not have the opportunity to report. Benchmarking with other states has made us realize that participation only improves through punitive action, and even with punitive action, returns above 90% are rare. The final law enforcement consideration is that mandatory reporting in and of itself will not help to prevent violations. We recognize that there are poachers who will exceed their bag limit by killing an OTC deer as well as a draw deer, or that there are people who may use an expired 2020 tag during the first week of a January 2021 hunt. These actions are already against the law. We are fortunate as an agency to have a compliance rate of over 95%, and though there will always be violators, mandatory reporting is not going to prevent this. The final consideration is tag modernization. The mandatory reporting subteam was highly connected with the tag modernization process and the development of our recommendation. The key components of tag modernization as it relates to mandatory harvest reporting are listed here. You can see the questionnaire information is collected as part of the tagging process. With tag modernization, when you tag an animal through the app on your phone, part of the tagging process is answering some of our hunter questionnaire questions. In order to receive a confirmation number for your harvested animal, you will have to answer those questions. They're very brief. It takes only seconds, but it streamlines the process. Tag modernization was developed in part to address some of these low response rates, things like youth any turkey and OTC deer. Tag modernization does not collect no hunt or no harvest information, so it does not collect participation or effort on these hunts, which is critical for writing hunt recommendations. The planned implementation for tag modernization is in spring of 2022. Tag modernization is not going to be required, and paper tags are still to be issued. Tag modernization would create a mandatory reporting equivalent for those that use the app to tag an animal that they have harvested. To summarize the pros for mandatory reporting, OTC deer and youth turkey have very low reporting rates, and mandatory reporting will improve this and provide more useful harvest data. Better data may support different modeling efforts that are more useful. Mandatory reporting may promote sportsmen to engage in the process and provide a sense of ownership in the hunt recommendation process, similar to a deer check station culture. Some hunts with few tags will benefit without increased effort from department staff to obtain this information, much like current sheep reporting and recommendations. And finally, it aligns with the tag modernization process and e-tagging. Here we have some of the cons listed for mandatory reporting. Again, current guidelines are developed from trend reporting data. We have a data set of 60+ years. Mandatory reporting needs 5 to 10 years to establish new trend data. We would need all of the info, not just harvest. This info would include participation and effort. Implementing mandatory reporting would be a drastic change with the potential to rewrite how we analyze data and make recommendations. Trend data is incredibly valuable in our decision making and allows us to compensate for biases in reporting. As I mentioned before, we know that hunters who harvested are more likely to send in their questionnaires. Having a trend data of 60+ years allows us to correct for that. Abandoning our current trend data would put our department to uncharted territory. 30% harvest from our current trend data may not necessarily be reflected as 30% harvest with mandatory reporting. Mandatory reporting is not necessarily better data, it's just different data. Our harvest data is statistically valid and will not necessarily improve by mandatory reporting, except for those hunts with low permits or OTC permits where we have return rates generally below 40%. A 40% rate of return in our questionnaire program is statistically very strong data. Recruitment, retention, and reactivation of hunters in Arizona is an important part of our mission. Putting added regulatory burden on hunters is a risk to that. Other states we have benchmarked with have not demonstrated 100% compliance to their mandatory reporting program, even with penalties in place. Mandatory reporting, specifically establishing punitive actions for not mandatory reporting, would require a rule change. Some of the infrastructure needs to implement mandatory reporting are listed here. It would be incredibly technology heavy. Online and OTC sales and reporting only. It would take years to develop. It's resource and cost intensive. Article 3 rule change, which I mentioned previously, is necessary, and it's being considered in the current rule review. Article review is the process by which the department changes commission rules. This process is sometimes years in the making, and Article 3 rules are those that pertain to the taking of wildlife. This is a summary of the options that the team has evaluated. The mandatory harvest reporting subteam remains in the process of forming a recommendation for the Hunt Guidelines Review Team and ultimately the Commission. The options we have listed are the status quo with tag modernization, deploying mandatory reporting to all hunts, or deploying mandatory reporting to select hunts, for example, OTC hunts or underreported hunts. Additionally, we have considered mandatory reporting from all tag holders, not just those who harvest. This would increase IT and enforcement issues drastically, but would account for no hunt or no kill information. It would collect the very important participation and effort information. That summarizes our presentation for today. Some of the additional resources for things you may be curious about, our online harvest reporting site is listed here. And more tag modernization information can be found under the additional hunting information tab at azgfd.com/hunting. Please submit any of your comments or questions to azhuntguidelines@azgfd.gov. Like I mentioned, we do review every single comment and try to respond to those. Thank you very much.